We face a lot of hardships on our journey to recovery. We fantasize of the old using days and how it made us feel. We think of all the times that were good and tell war stories to those around us. We forget how we single-handedly destroyed the lives of not just ourselves, but everyone who touched us to any degree. Our mothers crying late into the night, worried she might lose her child. Our fathers angry but broken at the sight of what drugs did to their son or daughter. That's just the start of turmoil families live in when they feel they lost something more important than material possessions to drug addiction. Many writers try and touch on the scope of addiction by referencing statistics or testimonials from treatment centers and clients. This narrative simply follows the journey one addict took to realize how widespread this problem is, the many facets of life addiction touches, and what I did to get to where I am today. My story starts off as a kid. Growing up in southwestern Wisconsin, I was from a relatively small town. There isn't too much in the way of crime or even fun. It's a fairly plain town. My family is full of fairly plain people. It doesn't seem like the rough beginning most expect from a drug addict, especially one of my nature. To all outside appearances, I was a normal, happy young lad, and many remarked I had something of a sharp wit about me. Everything about life in a small town was fairly simple. There wasn't much to stress about, especially as a kid. You didn't have to worry about what went on in a big city. In 4th grade, my parents announced to my sister and I that we were to be moving. Rather than across the street, we found our new residence fell approximately 2,000 miles to the southwest in northern Phoenix, Arizona. It came as a bit of a shock when I found myself attending a school with as many students as my entire hometown had people. It becomes easy to blend into a crowd of faces, which was both what I yearned to do but also couldn't pull off successfully. I sought to escape my reality by acting out here and there, never doing my tasks assigned or just being a disruption in general. I quickly fell into a group of kids who, like me, were all in honors classes and just didn't know what to do with themselves. Being in honors classes, we were given much more leeway into what it was we wanted, so long as we maintained high grades and didn't do anything too out of line. This was my first experience with using my intelligence to my benefit in order for me to get my way and simply not abide by the same rules as everyone else. In most regards, I was still what most would call a normal kid. I hung out with my friends, went to school, played sports, and was involved in band and other extracurriculars like NJHS. I was interested in joining the military or at least trying for military intelligence. By anyone's standard, I was no candidate to end up a drug addict. Girls began to come and go into my life, and I found quickly they could hurt me more than any physical wound, and it lasted much longer, as I fell madly in love with whichever girl wooed me, only to be entombed by utter obsession into their life. This changed when I got to high school. My girlfriend there would see me through the next 3.5 years of my journey, as I neared the end of the diving board and began to plummet into the pool of darkness below. At first, high school was a blow to the face. Having a few friends who are all for the most part nerdy like me, I was an excellent target on any bully's agenda. It didn't take me long to become ironclad against the soft blows of these same bullies, where I would wrap their words in the air, twisting them into a venomous snake that would bite back with malice. It wasn't until long that I was more feared than respected by my peers, for sharp words and a flurry of demeaning insults were simply all that was procured from my mouth, if there was even room for any association between us. Those I did call my friends found me to be a most suitable companion, be it the free food at my father's restaurant, my mother having a pool in the backyard, or my enormous room at her house. It helped that my parents divorced when I was in the 6th grade, my father being seldom home and my mother working late but never coming up to my room anyhow. I had the perfect setting for any high school party. I had been working at my father's restaurant part-time for a couple years by the time I was in high school, doing odd tasks and helping out the employees where I could. To others, I looked like a model citizen in the works, yet there was an evil growing inside me, begging to lash out at the ones I love in some twisted love-hate duality and destroy the ones I don't. It just didn't have the footing it needed in order to accomplish such a hateful task. My older cousin moved down to live with my uncle at his house. I was excited to see my cousin, as to me, he was the brother I simply never had but always wanted. I was smart, but I wanted someone to guide me in order for me to feel as though I'm training to utilize the intelligence to the best of my ability. Oh, how the young are naive, and how naive I was when young. Trusting that others will take the time to teach you how to do something without some ulterior motive or interest guiding their true intentions. So he took me under his wing, and my descent into the inferno began without pause until just a short while ago, when I found it wasn't as simple as walking back up the same staircase which I had come down. It started innocently enough. I simply wanted to escape the bounds of my own reality. I hardly even considered all drugs to be the same. To many, a rose is a rose is a rose, as a drug is a drug is a drug. Before I ever took a puff of a cigarette or sparked up a joint with a friend, I dove headfirst into the world of psychedelics. LSD was my first experience into an otherworldly escape, and I felt enlightened. I could use my senses beyond anything I could have imagined possible, but still I couldn't be satisfied as its effects don't last forever. I added smoking weed to my arsenal, and soon I was just an average pothead who had slightly above average intelligence. In the mix of everything else, I joined academic decathlon my sophomore year, which would turn into my being on the team through my junior and senior years. My using progressed as I found it more and more necessary to escape how fake everyone around me and their cookie-cutter reality seemed to be, while I was using chemicals to run away to a fake reality of my own. My emotions began running out of control, and the only way to subdue them became to drown them with different or more chemicals. Periodic bursts of energy followed by sullen depression laid the foundation to send me into a spiraling exhaustion. My girlfriend and family became concerned with my erratic behavior and questioned whether I was bipolar and needed medication. Little did they know I was already the doctor and the pharmacist in placing a diagnosis and then medicating myself with street drugs. My grades began to slip, but I decided to enroll in higher level classes anyway, since I could still pass many of the tests and knew much of the information. Then everything changed one night when my cousin asked me to come over and hang out for a bit. He had been hanging out with a coworker at the restaurant and discovered a new drug that he found to be even better than anything he had been doing before. I was right there with him to try anything he could possibly throw my way. I was interested in trying every drug there is at least once. He introduced me to Percocet 30s. We could smoke them on tinfoil, a method known as freebasing, or chasing the dragon. At least that's what they call it where I'm from. The next day, as I woke up, I fondly remembered the night before, the taste of burnt marshmallows, the smell in the air, and the feeling I had. All I could think about was more. More I had indeed. Instead of Perc 30s again though, this time he showed me a drug with similar effects, consumed the same way and much cheaper. I started smoking black tar heroin. I had a good deal of money saved up from working at my family's restaurants for so long that it was easy at first to sustain my newfound habit. In addition to that, I was continuing to work as the drugs hadn't yet begun to hinder my ability to perform well in the workplace. It was fun. I craved the escape I found in drugs. I started using more and more frequently. I was still performing well on tests and doing well in school for having such a rigorous schedule, but I found myself lacking time for doing homework with the busyness of work and the ultimate new time consumer: drugs. My grades fell further. Soon I didn't do much beyond going home to escape to my drugs. I felt as though my life was going nowhere fast. I was escaping every waking minute possible, floating off into a dreamless sleep that I would repeat the minute I woke. I didn't feel the will to live any longer. I saw myself floating into a dark place but couldn't muster the desire to change course. This isn't the beginning of a horror story. Rather, this is where my life took a dramatic shift from an honor student, athlete, hard worker who everyone looked at with expectations of going far and doing great things in life, to a degenerate, homeless heroin fiend ready to acquire drugs by any means necessary. In my twisted, depressed mind, I saw a way out of the monotony of everyday society which I felt was so fake and boring. Escape I did. I was a teenager trying to avoid figuring out who they were and what their purpose in life was. By all accounts, it seemed I had a grip on who I was and who I wanted to be. I exuded an aura of confidence, and to those I didn't like, an aura of superiority. I found myself believing that I was some evolved being, and those around me simply weren't in tune with the universe and the knowledge it contains. I learned anything and everything I could. There was no discussion I didn't interject my opinion in, no student I wouldn't fact check, and no teacher whom I felt inferior in my knowledge on a subject to. I thought I had discovered the God particle in heroin, a substance that stripped me of the seemingly weak moral and ethical attachments I felt and provided a platform for me to say and do anything I pleased on an utterly emotionless level. I thought I had found a way for my intelligence to be utilized without the hindrance of emotional attachment. I was right, and I was wrong. Along with my emotions, I was slowly stripping away the person I felt I was before. And that person did things I couldn't have even begun to imagine possible, as I would use everything I could to tear a person down and get a massive rush off what damage I caused them, then awake the next day in a pit of despair for what I did, only to need my drugs to drown the pain once more. So started a cycle that would uproot my very standing in society and the world as I knew it, and drag me time after time to the lowest pit of Tartarus where Kronos himself resides. Heroin opened Pandora's box, and save the few instances I sought to harness the power it released until all hope was lost. If you were to ask my family what kind of state I was in during this time period, I'm sure you would find a mixed bag of resulting answers. Everything from lazy to terrifyingly mean to downright lost and scared could describe the phases I would run through in any given minute, hour, or day. I was a whirlwind of fear, anxiety, and loathing, with the only constant being heroin. My friends pulled me up best they could. They cleaned me up and got me back on my feet. My girlfriend took care of me through the withdrawals. I promised to her, to God, to myself, that I would never do anything like this ever again, and for a first attempt to get clean, it worked for a time. I started to get back on track in my life in small ways, but they only lasted as long as my focus could on one thing, not much better than a goldfish. My girlfriend still supported me and held a good deal of my sanity, and is likely a large part of the reason I didn't suffer much worse consequences earlier. I was back on track and just in time for my family to come down from Wisconsin. Spring break of my junior year, I was at the lake the very first day visiting my grandparents. My friend couldn't come, so I took his sister. It was a warm, beautiful spring evening in the desert, and we went off-roading before dinner at my grandparents'. We were going up a hill I had driven on countless times before in their Polaris Ranger. Trying to be cool and fun, as teenage boys often do in the presence of a woman, I wiggled the wheel a little bit. This caused us to start fishtailing and lose control of the vehicle. She grabbed onto it to try and help, overcorrecting to one side. I, in turn, overcorrected to the other. I went out the door. The vehicle came over the top of me and kept rolling. She was flung out, and the ATV came to rest ever gently on top of her head and chest. I lay strewn in the dirt, my left leg straight out in front of me, my right wrapped back around my butt, with my knee extending my lower leg back in front. Like a scene in a movie, the adrenaline blistering through my veins, I thought, fuck, and then tried to wiggle my toes like a live rendition of Kill Bill. Assessing that my toes could, in fact, move, I figured the damage to my spine must be minimal, and I focused my efforts to helping the blood-curdling scream emitted from the wreck further down. I forced myself to face uphill, and like a crawfish, I scooted backwards through the gravel until I got to the wreck. Exhausted, I collapsed, drained by my efforts, and assessed her blood-soaked body, fresh blood still pouring from the wound in her face. By some stretch of fate, I managed to pull myself up the sideways vehicle and wave to the fire ranger station at the bottom of the hill. By a further stroke of luck, they saw me and came upon us after I once again collapsed from exhaustion. This ended with her in a coma and me needing a spinal fusion, hip reduction, and various other medical procedures. It also surmised to an IV drip of fentanyl. Much of the time I spent conscious was praying for her recovery more than my own. I felt responsible for everything. On leaving the hospital in acute rehab to learn to walk again, I was back out getting heroin to numb first the physical pain and then the emotional pain of the damage I caused another person, their family, and friends. I never started to ascend from the darkness I was enshrouding myself in. I simply paused the journey I was taking and how long it would take to get me there. My addiction started back up with a vengeance to paint my whole world black. I still made it to Hawaii with my academic decathlon team. With all my using, my performance suffered, but I was already focused on the next year to be at the top. I'd moved out of my parents' home before the accident and was staying either in the back seat of my friend's car or at my friend's apartment. After the accident, I spent about a month living at home before I found myself back at my friend's apartment to help take care of him, his sister, who was in the accident, and his mom. This is where I reached the point of no return. Once nationals were over, I was staying there almost every night, using in the bathroom almost every day, leaving at night to go out with my friends to get my fix. If not before, my life was certainly starting to get out of control, and everyone but me could see it. I was using on the way to school, in the bathroom, and after school. My girlfriend left me 3 months into our senior year, when I started using on our anniversary date at the opera I'd been setting up for months. But I was in a blinded, drug-fueled rage and lashed out at her, my words cutting like whips tipped with metal spikes. The worst part is, I still don't remember what I said, and I love that girl more than any before and any since. I felt truly lost, and I only knew of one salvation. So I did what I knew best. I proceeded to drown my feelings and thoughts with drugs, running from the fact that I am my own worst enemy, while blaming and hurting anyone who stepped into my path, innocent or not. The story might be different, the people are different, the actions might not be the same, but what should be similar is the thoughts and feelings that unfolded in my collapsing life. I was top of my team for academic decathlon my senior year. I did what was the only studying in my entire life to that point on some of the material for competition, and I was doing pretty well. After a decent event at regionals, followed by the event with my girlfriend leaving me, state was coming up and I was succumbing to a full-blown addiction. I was skipping the second half of the school day to walk across the street to my drug dealer's house. That is, if I even went at all. I completed my essay for state competition, but when we went for our interviews and speeches, my teacher noticed I was off. While practicing, she searched my bag and found the drugs I had on me. She called my mom to come and get me from what was the most important event in my life to that point. I was pulled from school, and the next night, I was on a flight to Tennessee. Rehab.